Good morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm going to be showing you what I've been learning this year. Just in case you want to refer back to the slides or you get lost and you want them again, you can find them at assertchris.dev. Scroll down to the bottom here and see more, and then high performance agentic engineering, the top one. It's a very fluffy way of titling a workshop, meant to appeal to people who have a lot of workshops to choose between. But essentially, it's just how to use AI without being frustrated and to do really good work. Before we get into it, I just want to give you a brief rundown of the schedule because there's a lot and it's 2 hours and whatever. So we're going to start off with some researching and planning and implementing, the steps and the skills for that. We'll take a short break because that's roughly about halfway through. And then we'll do a little bit more implementing, the PR flow, the merge flow, and then follow up with some tips and a demo of something called Friday. A little bit about me, despite Chris's huge introduction. I want to give you some insight into my journey with this. I have been making stuff for like 20 years, full stack mobile apps, game dev, all bits and pieces in between over many languages. But those were all things that were like the old way of learning stuff. So like figuring out a language and learning its constructs and learning its standard libraries and all of those kinds of things. Then beginning of this year, everything changed and I actually got good for code. My PRs last year were 214, and this year so far it's 415. So that's like a huge shift. But as Chris pointed out, since the beginning of this year, all of my code has been done through AI stuff in various forms. So that's actually quite an interesting metric. Like there's a very clean break. January I started with this stuff, and it's been a good productivity boost as the numbers tell, but also it's been a year of many aha moments. You know, like when you started learning to make a thing and then you learned like a very interesting technique and it just changed like the trajectory of how you work since then. Like there have been multiple of these this year for me. So some of them I'll talk about in here, but probably a bunch of it's going to be waffle that you can have with me afterwards if you're interested. Our focus is not going to be how to manage 20 agents in parallel. That is a pretty largely advertised aspect of AI stuff, but that's not what the point of this workshop is. Our focus for this workshop is how you effectively use AI to reduce frustration, to reduce things that you have to redo because the AI hasn't cracked it, to reduce those moments where you want to scream at it because it's done something really stupid. So our focus is just dialing in on a single process, getting it right, making sure that we're using the tools effectively and getting the best out of them. Okay. I'm going to take this, I'm going to like do this workshop in like parallel using AI, which is kind of meta because that's also our focus, but because I think that there are some moments of waiting with AI during which I can explain a bit about what it's doing and why it's doing it that way. On the right here, I just have a terminal open. I'm going to use a tool called Claude Code, CLI. You may have heard of it. If you haven't used it much before, don't worry, we'll go through the basics of it. But I'm going to get it started so long. Okay. I have a code folder or a project that I've been working on. I just want to make a little API. It's related to Friday, but I don't really want to go into too much detail about it. It's a PHP application. Again, doesn't matter because these tricks and tools and workflow work with any language, any framework, whatever. But just for the purposes of making this application, I did it as a PHP application. And it's really bare bones. I set it up yesterday. I added like a single feature onto it because I wanted to work through the workflows to make sure that they were all still working 100%. And so we're going to work on this almost from scratch as we build the thing. So far, it is just a running application. It's going to become an API server. It's got an admin section, which is provided by an open source package called Filament. Blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. But I want to bolt something new onto this. So I'm going to, yes, I can increase the font size. Let me see if I can do that through here. I'm going to work on it in Claude Code. I'm going to do some research with Claude Code, and then we'll see how we go further on from that into implementation and to the pull request flow and all of that. I don't think that that has... Okay, so that's increased the editor font size. I'm not sure about the UI font size. Okay, I'm in this code folder now. I launched Claude Code from the code folder of this API project. So we're going to research. Let's give it a little brief. And then we can let it dive into the code base to figure out what's what. Now, the process that I'm going to talk about is one that I didn't come up with. It's called RPI, which is short for Research, Plan, and Implement. And it is a set of workflows that allows you to come up with a really good brief and implementation plan. And it doesn't just work for AI. It's actually a really good workflow to work in teams with, and to make sure that you are covering all the bases of the features that you want to implement or the fixes you want to make or whatever. You start by coming up with research. You approach this discussion either with AI or someone else in your team, or even if you're just trying to come up with research yourself, you approach it with ideas and questions you have. You may be thinking you want to build, say this API project, for instance, you might want to build a notes module that lets you have API endpoints that you can hit to read the notes or to add new ones or change them. And so you might have like an idea about how you want to structure that, maybe in the database layer, maybe particular libraries you want to use. Maybe you want the notes to be marked down and rendered out as HTML in the end. You approach the discussion with these ideas, right? And if you're dealing with AI, you talk to it about this, you tell it what you want to build, you ask it questions, you get it to ask you questions about how the thing should look in the end, and you put all of that learning somewhere. One of the interesting problems with AI is that it forgets everything the moment you go to a new context. And even if the context gets full, it starts forgetting things as well. So it's really ideal when you are having a long discussion with AI about the research, about the thing you want to build, that you put this discussion, the notes about it, the essential stuff about it, and open questions into somewhere. But that can be anywhere. You can set up a database that you write to. You can put this in Markdown files. You can connect it to Obsidian, which is just a Markdown editor with some cool Vault stuff. And wherever you put it, the idea is just you write it somewhere so that you can refer back to it, and so that if something goes wrong in the discussion with AI, you can get it to read that note back so that it gets back to where it was before the problem happened, and you can carry on working on it. You don't have to start from scratch again. Okay, so it's got a few options for me now. Let's see. I don't really want an open API spec for this yet. I don't know about all these other things. I was just thinking maybe Markdown. All right. So you approach this discussion with ideas and questions. What once you've got that research written into a file, you can use it to start to create a solid plan. So the research is just, here's what we want to build. Here are some ideas about how we build it. We've gone through the weeds, but we've figured out questions we need to answer. That becomes the basis for a structured phased-based plan. You don't have to do this in phases, but I find that it works a lot better if you do, because the work is smaller and easier to review. And because if it gets stuck with something like a failing test, it doesn't have to debug the entire process. It just has to debug what it did in this phase, right? What have we got going here? Okay, we'll get it to put the research into a file. Okay. Once you've got this research in a file, you can have the AI inspect it and create this plan. This plan is much more concrete. It looks at the code base. It figures out the process for installing dependencies, for wiring things up, what tests it needs to make, how it's going to check that the work is correct. And then once you have that plan, you can get to implementing. You can also, I mean, this workflow also has the added benefit of you being able to use one AI model for research, a different AI model for planning, a different AI model for implementation, if you want to do that. So, for example, you can use a really beefy model like Fable to do research and planning, and a much cheaper model like Sonnet or Opus to do the implementation. Or if you want to do some local model stuff, you could maybe get a cloud model to do the planning and research, and then a local model just to follow the detailed implementation plan. So it gives you a lot of flexibility because you are following a good workflow and because you are writing stuff to files. Okay, it's made a research doc over here. Let's see, what's the next step in here? Okay, let me talk a little bit about coding harnesses, because I think before we get too much into what Claude Code is actually doing, it's good to understand what Claude Code is. So Claude Code, you may have heard of it. There are alternatives to this like Open Code or like the Pi framework. All of these things aren't actually models themselves. They're called harnesses. So the model is the thing that will parse your language and will synthesize new text, but the harness is the thing around it that gives it tools to do that. Claude Sonnet, for example, can't read the file system, but the harness of Claude Code can say, here are tools that you can use to read files in the file system. Tell me when you want me to run them, and I will give you the results. So the harness is the tooling around the model, and you can switch models inside of a harness. So in Claude Code, you can switch to Fable, or you can switch to Sonnet, or Opus, or Haiku. In Open Code, you can switch to a whole bunch of models, but the harness stays the same and gives them tools to be able to request useful work and to act upon the results of that useful work. There are ways that you can extend Claude Code. If you use it for a little while, you may see, okay, I'm doing this task every week. I need to try and package this up so that it can be a lot quicker for me to do. I don't have to explain every time to the model what I want done. You can package those kinds of things up in what a bunch of these different harnesses called skills. They're just files with textual instructions that the model can figure out it needs to load and then read. So you may have a skill that is like submit a pull request with all of the instructions that you like to happen when you submit a pull request. You put all of those instructions in a file, and the file gets a little description that says something along the lines of, when you want to make a pull request, this is the skill file that you load. And then when you're talking to Claude Code and you're saying, okay, make a pull request, it searches and finds that description of the related skill, and then it reads the whole skill file, and then it does the stuff in the skill file. It's not like a function from programming. It's more like just an instruction set that it knows to load and that it loads. And then you don't have to give those instructions every time you want the thing to happen. There are times when you want something a little bit more structured than a skill file. because it's just a set of instructions and the model can choose to ignore parts of it or have poetic license for other parts of it. So when you want something that is more like a programming function, that is more deterministic and structured, you have things called MCP tools. There's a bunch of other things, but this is the most common way of doing this structured input and output. You can make a set of tools, or you can download a set of tools from somebody else like Jira or GitHub. And these tools can then be provided to the model, and the model can do useful stuff with them. It still has that description search behavior, but the tool then says, this is how you use me, this is the output that I will give you back. And so the model has less freedom to ignore or interpret. It just really gets to using the tool as the tool's meant to be used. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of skills. I'm going to talk about a few MCP tools. You don't really need to use MCP tools or know exactly how they work for now, but it's good that you know that they exist so that you can learn about them when skills just no longer cut it for the thing that you want to do. Okay, we have done a little bit of research in the terminal on the right here. It's interesting. It's interesting when you're using these models, you will sometimes see that they will like work a little bit ahead, and you'll say, okay, I want to figure out how we're going to build this feature, and then they'll start building it sometimes. In Claude Code, you can actually press Shift Tab, and you'll see at the bottom here, it has different modes that you can switch to. If you're planning in Claude Code, if you're researching and planning, it's a pretty good idea to go into plan mode, because then there are like rules that it then sees that it shouldn't edit the code base immediately. It should just carry on planning. I don't typically use Claude Code, so I don't really get to take advantage of this, but I still, when I am researching and planning, tell the model, okay, we're just planning now. I don't want you to make any edits to files. That can be embedded inside of a skill, but it can also just be part of the instruction that you give it, right? There are also other modes worth checking out there. Shift Tab to scroll through them. As I mentioned, it's good to actually record the research and the planning so that you can refer back to them, but also because the research can feed into the planning in a way that I will show you shortly. Your options, I mentioned database, Obsidian, Markdown files. However you store it is fine, as long as the agent can write to it and read it back. Okay. And then you loop for improvements. I didn't actually loop through the research of this. It was actually quite shallow research. I said what I wanted to do. It gave me some options I didn't like. I suggested an alternative that I did like, and that got recorded. But you're not always going to get perfect research or perfect planning immediately. And it's useful to know that you can get the agent to loop over its research and over its planning to improve on that. You can say something like, loop over the research and correct gaps and weaknesses. It's got tools to be able to loop over this. It's pretty good at understanding that it should write those changes back to wherever you are storing this. And it's also pretty good at spotting gaps there, or things where it hasn't been specific enough or hasn't answered enough questions. Usually, a loop like this, I would give more instructions. I'd say something like, loop over this, you can write it to a Scratch file if I'm not already using a Markdown file. Look for weaknesses. I would also switch to auto mode. I'll talk about that in a minute. You can give a lot of instructions there, and it is actually worth putting this into like a predefined prompt or a skill where you run this thing after your research and you just do it every time. Because it's pretty cheap to iterate on research and planning like this, but also it's going to lead to a much more exact plan. So there's less wiggle room for the model to do the wrong thing if the plan and the research are good to begin with. Okay, auto mode. I mentioned that there are different modes you can get to with Shift Tab. It's kind of annoying to have to approve it writing to every file every time. But what you can do is you can switch to auto mode, and then there is a LLM-based classifier, which is just a fancy way of saying it'll review the things the model wants to do, and if they are not disastrous to do, like if they are not catastrophic things, then it'll allow things through. So things like read-only operations, it'll allow through. Editing files in the folder you're in, it'll allow through. But changing system config, it won't, or anything like that could potentially be unintended. If it's confused, if it's ambiguous, it'll just make you confirm it first. Okay, it's done 5. What are the things it did? It clarified some language. It added some stuff for dependencies. It's interesting that it added no JS requirement. Yeah, so I mean, it's clarified some vaguenesses in the research. Okay, and also I was on the money there. The syntax highlighting JavaScript stuff is just for pretty syntax highlighting. Okay, so I'm kind of happy about this. Let's just have a look quickly in the research here to make sure that it has put stuff in here. So Laravel Markdown, that's the Node.js requirement there. If you're writing to files, it's also pretty easy for you to then go into your editor and actually look at what's been changed here. I'll talk about that as well. Okay, we've got that file there. You loop for improvements. You're looking to basically improve, find gaps, find errors, and make sure that the plan that is built on top of this research is actually pretty solid. You should be asking yourself whether the research that you've got and the planning you've got are at the point where you would feel comfortable actually building from them. If you don't, do some more loops, answer some more questions, get some really good research to begin with. Okay, I've put a bunch of these slides in between because I am reminded that I talk a bunch and I don't wait for questions. So are there any questions specifically about the research part of this process? Okay, there'll be other points for you to ask questions if you didn't fill up to it now. Okay, once you've got the research, once I've got the research, what I tend to do is run a thing called a new feature workflow. By the way, I link to all the skills that I'm going to use here, so you don't need to like try and remember everything that I'm telling you now. You'll be able to inspect them at your leisure. So I've got this research doc in the folder. Now I'm going to clear the context, and then I'll say something like new feature workflow. This is a skill that I've got that does a whole bunch of things. I'll talk about while it's working. So the first is it's going to ask me what the feature is about. And I can give a whole paragraph if I want to, but actually it's just looking for a short string because it's going to use this to name a branch, to name a folder, to name a document. So I'm going to say docs pages. Okay, it's going to convert that into a slug with a date prefix, and it is going to do 3 things. Well, it's a bit more, but main 3 things. It's going to make a new branch off of main using that slug that it's got now and the date. It's going to make a work tree folder to which that branch is checked out to. And it's also going to make an empty document feature doc. It's just a markdown file that describes the feature, but part of this workflow, or at the end of this workflow, it's just going to be an empty feature doc because there's a separate planning phase that happens. I use work trees because they're really cool. I will be working on any given day on maybe 4 or 5 different features, and those are spread over a couple repositories. So it makes sense to have different branches on the same code base that share things like dependencies and maybe virtual server configuration. but are separate code bases that I can, or separate branches and like code folders that I can work in without them conflicting with each other, so that they are separately mergeable, but individually viewable at any given time. So Worktree is pretty good. You don't need to understand how to wire these up yourself, because the AI can do this for you. And I've got this encoded in the skill for my preferences. So each folder that I run this in, there is a .worktrees folder, which the skill creates if it's missing. It creates the worktree in there. And this is basically a copy of what was on main, plus the new feature docs. So there is an empty feature doc. You'll see this is just a template for now. This is all managed by the skill. I didn't have to do any of this to make this work. It tells me at the end the new work tree is over there. I can copy this, and then I'm going to jump out of Claude Code because I want to launch it from the new folder. So I'll say cd. That's the folder over there. Oh no, it's broken that command. Awkward. It copied the new lines. Oh, it's fine. Okay, now I'm in that work tree and I can launch Claude again. When you launch Claude from a different folder, it is a different context. It has no memory of what I typed previously in the session. This is a completely empty slate. But because I have this research doc out here, I'm not starting from scratch. So I can say plan workflow. That's my new workflow that converts research into a detailed phased plan. Yes, you can run it. I'm going to put auto mode on again so it can freely read and write for files. And I'm going to say read research.md in line. And it's going to use the contents of the research file to inform the plan. It's like 100 lines of general research with dependency suggestions and suggested places for file edits. Now it's going to go through and create research phases for each chunk of work. How does it determine how big a phase is or what goes into a phase? I don't really have guidance for it there. I kind of just see what it does and then suggest changes after the fact if I'm not happy with what it has come up with. Okay, the new workflow feature, the new feature workflow skill, you can find there. This is actually a clickable link in the slides. I'll post a link to the slides at the end in chat, and also it'll probably be in the Discord as well. Then we switch to the worktree, as you saw me do, and then we get to planning. So it's a file that gets written just like the research doc. The research doc actually gets deleted after this plan is done, in the case that I'm using it here. Day to day, I actually don't delete them immediately. They live in a database and they're somewhere else. But the plan doc is actually the important part. And once that's written, the research can go. Each phase gets its own research pass. So you'll see Claude Code is doing an interesting thing here where it is switching to like sub-agents, and it's doing that per phase. So it reads the research, it determines roughly what the phases are, and then it gives sub-agents a brief. Sub-agent in harnesses is just a different context with a model that's running on it. So it's kind of a way, if you're into systems programming, to like fork a process with like new memory, or I don't know how else we can talk about this. The models all have this concept of a context. It's their memory. And when that context gets really full, problem. Something has to go out of it for new stuff to enter into it. So I'm using Claude Code, this session here, as like an orchestrator. And then I'm saying, plan out this, or make this plan, but for each phase that you identify, just let a sub-agent do it so that all of the context required to plan that individual phase goes to the sub-agent's context and doesn't enter the orchestrator's context. And when they're done, they just write back to the doc, and that all of the stuff they had to load into context to get the plan for that phase just goes away. The important stuff's written to the doc, and everything else gets forgotten. So research phase 1 agent is done. Research phase 3 is done. We're just waiting for phase 2. You can see this is the brief that the orchestrating agent gave to the sub-agent. So it's plan phase 2. Here are all the tasks you need to do. Don't implement anything. And then when they get their stuff, their research for that specific phase, back to the orchestrator thread, they stop happening, and the orchestrator can write that into a phase doc. We can actually see what that looks like when this gets updated after the third sub-agent returns. The plan skill, there's a link to see what that is. Okay, and then we get to manual review. So while we wait for this to finish, I'll talk a little bit about this. You need to review the research, but even if you don't, you need to review the plan. Because if it's a bad plan, you're going to do bad code. The agent's going to produce bad code. There are many things that are just assumptions that these models can make that are not actually what you want, and they can be costly assumptions in terms of time or in terms of having to revert stuff if they do big unwanted changes. So I have, for example, in the past asked an agent to remove a set of MCP tools, and it assumed because I was removing those MCP tools, I also wanted the browser UI related to them gone. And there went my browser UI as like an unintended consequence because I didn't properly review the plan afterwards. A lot of stuff can go wrong, especially when you're dealing with production environments or operations that are like dangerous, like deleting database stuff or deleting important files. You definitely want to review the plan. You can check the order, the correctness, the completeness. You can also loop on this, like we did with the research. You can do a plan, and then you can just tell it to loop. And for each phase, check what it's doing. Is it correct? Is it complete? I think that the research is more important to loop, because with really good research, you will get a good plan, but you should still review. So don't just YOLO it. Don't vibe code stuff. Okay. It's gotten all the agent responses back, so we're just waiting for it to write this file out. It's going to take its time, isn't it? Okay, while we're waiting for that, are there any questions about the planning stuff? And if you don't ask the question, there's going to be awkward silence while we wait. All right, it's done 5 phases. That's interesting. There were 3 sub-agents for this, but it synthesized 5 phases. Okay. This feature doc follows a template that's encoded in the skill. So when you go and check out the skill, you can see that template. Is a question. Yes. How can we avoid the assumption from the agent when we ask for creating a plan? I think if you do really good research and you're involved in that part of it, then your plans tend to not have a whole bunch of bad assumptions. But in that loop that you do, where you say, look for gaps, you can also tell it, as I mentioned, I give like a few extra instructions there. You can also tell it, identify assumptions and ask me about them. There are some skills that are quite popular around called Grill Me. It's more a methodology than a specific skill, but essentially you can set up skills or prompts that will get the model to interrogate the research, to interrogate you, to figure out where it is making assumptions, and to actually codify the correct facts there instead of the assumptions. So that's mostly how you get rid of the assumptions from the plan. But review the plan, right? It's broken it down now into different phases. So we can go through each of these phases and figure out what it's doing. You can see it's a lot more detailed than the 100 lines of research, right? This was just broad brushstrokes, but the plan is very detailed. So how it's installing the dependencies, what follow-on installation steps are required, publishing config, and then phase 2, doing some front-end stuff. It's actually a very small phase here. It's just basically making a layout file. Phase 3 is doing folio pages. So folio, not really important to understand, but it's just this first-party library in the PHP framework that I'm using here that converts Markdown files to HTML and does the routing as well. I actually don't know if, but yeah, it does have okay, it does have Markdown. So yeah, it's just like a file-based routing Markdown to HTML thing. Write the connecting Markdown content. So this is making the actual code from the original brief that I had, making the actual documentation for how to connect to the API. And then phase 5 is some tests for this, basic smoke tests. Now, ordinarily, I would spend a lot more time looking at the details of this doc and making sure that the tests it's writing are good, or the files that it edits are good. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to say, okay, cool, I'm happy with it. You can delete that file and commit. Now that the feature doc is going to be committed, whatever happens after this point, I can always refer back to it because it's going to be in the Git history. Unless the model just like wipes Git history, I guess. Right, so this file will be deleted. What's in storage? Debug bar stuff. I should actually, okay. It's going to ignore that. Okay, so it's remove the research. It's committing this feature doc. I actually want to change my skill to not put this template in here because it's already got the template from like elsewhere. So I actually want to change my skill to not put this in the same project. Okay, it's got that there. I can clear the context. Now, a new workflow. Implement. Now, I have a workflow to implement every phase in the doc, but it's important to understand what's actually happening there. So I'm going to implement 1 or 2 of the phases as I used to do, a phase at a time. And I think when you're starting out, this is actually a really good approach to do. So there's a clear context. I have this thing in here. I'm going to say, read the feature doc matching the branch. That's going to get it into this plan file that we just made. Okay, now it knows what we want to do. Then I'm going to say something along the lines of, that. So I'm going to tell it to do just one phase, not to do more ahead of that. Run tests. Run the tests, update the feature doc, and then finally commit. If you do this a phase at a time, you can actually review its work as it's done it. This is the best way to make sure that what it is implemented is good. You can set up a virtual server to the app that you're working on. If it's like a web app, you can build, if you're building a mobile app and you need some IDE to compile it, you can do that at each phase to make sure that the thing that it's done in the phase is good. And if it's not, you can either just tell it not to commit before you've approved, or you can tell it to amend the commit with whatever changes you want to make to that work. So this gives you the best way to keep a handle on what the model is doing before it runs completely ahead and commits the wrong thing, or like breaks your app just because of this one feature that you're working on. I recommend you follow this pattern. Okay, so it's implementing phase one. This can take, depending on the size of your phases, can take a few minutes. It can take a few hours. With a very good workflow, which this research plan implement is, you can get it to plan for like an hour and then review the plan. And you can get it to implement for like 5 hours, and then you can review all the phases, phase by phase, if you want to. With a good workflow, you can also do this with smaller models. I exclusively use Sonnet, and I have used Sonnet first since the beginning of the year, and only switched to Opus when there was still that specific week usage limit for Sonnet. They used to have a total tokens for the week, and then a specific Sonnet tokens, and then a 5-hour window. And the moment they added Fable, they did away with the Sonnet one. So now it's great because I can just use Sonnet. This Claude Code session is running on Sonnet 4.6. You can use smaller models like this and still get really good work if your workflow is really good. And this is a really good workflow. So, okay, it's busy working. How do you think that ask agent to do test-driven development or test pass development when you make an agent to implement a feature? So I don't think it matters much anymore like it used to matter, but I think the important thing is that you make sure it is adding tests, and your skills can actually say, add the tests for the code that you write in the same phase that you write that code. So it's like, doesn't matter whether it's doing it before it writes that code or after, but as long as it's doing the tests at the same time so that you're not committing broken code, that's what you want, right? There used to be a difference where when we were actually writing the tests ourselves and writing the code ourselves, there used to be a difference. But now, as long as it's writing the tests, it can do it before or after. It's basing both the tests and the implementation on the plan. So if the plan is right and you review that, then it's going to make good tests and good code. I say good tests, there's a caveat there. It can like make nonsense tests. Like, I find these models like to make tests for configuration. So they'll assert you have a certain value in config files. And I hate tests like that, because that the test breaks the moment you change the config, and changing the config is intended behavior. So like sometimes they'll do that you might not want. I've seen skills that tell the model to not use mocks in tests because they like using mocks a lot. But I think that there are instances where sometimes you just got to do the mock or you won't get the test, right? Like, I got onto this project where an agent had been used to write it from the beginning, and there was a massive test suite, which is really good, but the tests all avoided mocks to the point where the test suite took like 5 minutes to run. And it was disastrous to follow RPI in that instance, because then every phase it would run the full suite and then commit. And then, you know, big problem. So the first thing I did on that project was try and recreate the test suite with better coverage, but using mocks in places where mocks made sense to do, so that the thing could be quicker. And I got the test speed down from like 5 minutes to like 70 or so seconds. Still a lot of tests to run, but much more doable, right? So yeah, I'd say it doesn't matter when you do it, as long as you do the tests. And you can, like, reviewing the tests is also a really good way of seeing that the implementation covers what you want it to cover, and also that the model hasn't done anything silly in testing that you would want it to clean up, like make tests for config. Okay, phase one is done. So it's committed this. And because of that, it hasn't highlighted anything. But I think what we're going to look for here is pages. There's a pages folder here. It's just configured the dependencies as far as I know. So Folio is in there, which is that first party markdown thing I spoke about. It's got the folder there, which the Folio install post step did. And there's probably like a there's the app folder. This scrolling thing that hides folders really gets to me. There's probably a service provider for this folio service provider there. Okay, so yeah, it's done phase one. I don't know if there are any tests that could have written for phase one though. No, those are just pre-existing tests. So here, what would probably have been better in the plan is to say, okay, for phase one, you should actually make a page and a test that asserts that that page renders properly. So this is a planning issue where I should have done a bit better in the review of that plan, but it's followed the plan for phase one. My advice is you do this phase by phase and you review it. If there are less important projects or you're just tinkering on a side project and you wanted to just do all phases and then you will review, you can also do that. And I have a skill for that. So that skill you can find a link to at the bottom of this. So yeah, one phase per time. The implement skill actually uses sub-agents per phase, just like the planning skill did, so that the context for that phase lives and dies with that sub-agent. And each phase ends with a commit, something about its commit message, and there is a link to the implement workflow. Okay, I think that's where we go on a break, because we've been going for an hour, and I wanted to start it implementing the rest of the phases while we do this break. So for the next, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, you can stretch your legs, get some coffee, and ask questions. If you have them, I'm going to stick around.
Thank you, Chris.
Let's be back here at 8 minutes past. Yes. Wasn't for me then. I didn't actually explain why I need to clear the context. So when the context gets full with these models, some of the harnesses have this process called auto compaction, and it's essentially just a way for them to try and clear the unnecessary things out of context and keep the necessary things, but sometimes they get it wrong and it takes time to do. So you'll see if you use one of these harnesses that you can work on it for like half an hour, whatever. And then when the context gets full, the harnesses will say something like compacting or clearing context or whatever. And in that process, they are summarizing what's necessary to keep and deleting the rest, and then loading that summary back into a new context. But that's a lossy process. They can lose detail there. The alternative is that they just don't do this and the context gets full and stuff starts dropping off the back of the context. So the agent just forgets what you spoke about an hour ago. Both of these things have their trade-offs. As I said, it's a lossy thing. So part of writing the important stuff to files that we can read back later is to make sure that we can create a new context with the important details, and we're not letting the harnesses decide what's important to keep. But then also clearing at each like main step just makes sure that we are in no risk of that auto compaction happening or getting anywhere near the context limit. How do you use an agent to do code review? So there are skills that I'll talk about later, that I'll show later, that can be completely agent controlled. I like to do a lot of code review at the point where it is sitting in a GitHub pull request. So I'll talk about this again later, but the TLDR of it is that I make a pull request in draft mode. I read through every line of code in that pull request, and then subsequent commits to fix stuff. Multi-development developer environment and agentic engineering. Best practice for large code base would be committing your plans. I've got this features folder that just has markdown files in it. Though these are all plans, I commit those plans as part of the pull request. So you'll see the skills that we look at later. They actually use the plan to do things like generate a GitHub pull request description or to generate QA notes. That plan is a really good way of explaining to your future self or to someone else, this is why I did the thing I did, and these are the broad strokes for how I did it. And then Git history just complements that. Evals and open telemetry. Evals are actually not something I'm going to talk about here, because while I think they are really cool and useful, they are they relate to harness engineering, not so much using the harnesses. So if you have, this is the distinction between you building something with AI or building something that has AI in it. If you are building something with AI, like I'm demonstrating here, where I'm using AI to build a product, you don't need evals necessarily. If you are building something that includes AI to deliver features, then having an eval makes a lot of sense. Evals, if you're not familiar, are just automated tests for models. But they're a whole interesting and useful topic on their own. I don't really think they relate to day-to-day work using AI to build product. Reading every line of code. Look, I think the question is, sorry, I should read the question. Does reading every line of code scale going forward? I think just looking at the numbers of my pull requests last year versus this year, there's been 100% uptick in pull requests, and the majority of those are merged, and the majority of them follow RPI. I think that the bottleneck isn't writing code. The bottleneck is complexity. And I think that the job of AI in our coding isn't to make us type faster. It is to walk the path of complexity quicker. It's let me try and give you an example of what I'm thinking here. I can build something really big these days. I can build a Slack bot that, no, Slackbot's a terrible example. I can build a game engine. I can build a game engine that someone can use to make games with. And I can do this very quickly. And I could always do this, but I didn't because of the amount of work involved in doing it. And to some degree, AI has really helped move that forward, and I've been able to build a game engine. But it's not just the typing that it helps, and I don't even think that typing is the primary benefit, because it can type a lot of stuff that's garbage as well. I think the primary benefit of it is that I don't have to understand every aspect of how a game engine works to make a game engine. It's going to be terrible if I understand no aspects of it, but there are things in it that I don't need to fully understand all the time to build that game engine, because the model is able to discuss with me and to research and to suggest a path to tackling all the aspects necessary to make a game engine. So I think that figuring out complexity is the benefit there, more than just getting it to generate stuff, because it can generate crap as well. How to write the agent handoff to avoid other agents spending more time checking the current status. So I think the plan doc is a really good agent handoff, and the orchestrator passing instructions to sub-agents are really good handoff mechanisms. There are handoff skills. If you just do a search, you will find people who have handoff skills, and these are more useful in the instance where you know you are going to have to move to a different model, or you know auto compaction's coming up, or you need to move a process to a different machine or whatever. But writing to the feature doc is all the handoff you will need in RPI. I promise you. Like, I've never had to use a handoff file. There have been a handful of times in the past year I have wanted a handoff process, but day to day, I have almost never needed it because of writing the feature doc and following RPI. Lots of cool questions. Workflow for consistency of UI. That's a really good question, and I'm not an expert enough to talk about this. I think there are people who are doing good work here. UI.sh, the Tailwind guys are working on as like a agent skill framework for doing UI stuff. I think to do UI consistently, you need to codify the UI patterns in language. I'm working on a project that someone else did, that thing with that project with the huge test suite that took so long. The original developer of that did an amazing job of codifying what the UI style guide was, the component style guide, and adding guardrails so that when an agent generates UI stuff, it looks at that UI style guide and generates it according to that. I think documenting the UI style guide is essential, and it works for humans as well as agents. So you should probably be doing it, and the agents can help you do it. Some cases, would you share some cases when you felt frustrated using agentic engineering and how you managed to solve them? There is a really good tip coming up for that removes the majority of my frustration. My frustration, I find these days, is like more inflammatory, because the more I use the agents, the more benefit I see in them. And then when it disappoints me, it's like worse, right? Because it's helped me do all these cool things and it's able to do all these things. And then like the odd time once a week that it does a stupid thing, and I'm like, how could you be like this? It kind of makes me feel like the frustration with a child, which is a really weird comparison because it's not, and children are so much better. But like, it's the same kind of thing where I know it's capable of more, and then when it disappoints me, it's like, oh, why are we doing this again? But there's a really good tip coming up for avoiding the majority of that. I have not felt frustrated in an agent's inability to do something, in a model's inability to do something. I can remember 2 instances in this entire year when a model has been unable to do a technical thing. And one of, also game dev related, but like, that's it. You'll find the better your workflow is, the less a model is able to not do the thing that you want. It's down to how you instruct it, how you've codified your best practices, your desires, and then documenting in feature docs, basically. Lots of good questions. How do you classify an amateur vibe coded? How do you classify an amateur vibe coded to agentic engineering or vibe engineering? What's the key difference between that way of thinking? So I think the question here is the difference between vibe coding and agentic engineering. I think agentic engineering is a really fluffy thing. I don't think developers are engineers in the classical understanding of the word engineering, but that's a very philosophical discussion we can have over coffee sometime. I think the difference between vibe coding and not vibe coding is how I would phrase that. Is vibe coding is when you are just not engaged with what is being built. You're not really engaged with the research, the planning, or the implementation. You give it a brief, and at the end, you hope it's what you want. You can have some semblance of research and planning and implementation and still be vibe coding because you're not engaged with the thing. You just want to get out. You just want to have it produce something. When you get into the mindset of, I just want it done, I don't really care how, that becomes vibe coding. Whereas non-vibe coding, you are deeply engaged with what it needs to build and how it's building it. Even though you're not typing the code, you are there telling it, I don't like how you've done that thing, restructure. Then it becomes not vibe coding. We have thousands of features and logs. Would you get Claude to read the whole history of the development and increasing input token usage as the project grows? That's a very good question. I think the feature docs aren't necessarily there so that the agents can read the entire history of the project. They are there when you say, there's a bug in docs. Help me figure it out. And then it does a search and finds that feature doc where the docs were built. And then it looks at why they were built and how they were built. And then it sees there's a dependency that it's using in there. And then it goes and looks at the issue tracker and sees that that's where the bug is. I think that the feature docs are there so that related work can be traced back to its origin. But if you want to read everything and summarize, I would say that it's a highly underutilized skill that is telling it to do something in sub-agents using a cheap model like Haiku. You can say to it, I want a summary of how this thing was built. For each feature doc, launch a sub-agent in Haiku to summarize that feature doc. And then you'll get back your summaries and you'll have spent very few tokens and it'll be pretty fast and you'll still have that full history. So sub-agents with Haiku, underrated skill. How do you manage token consumption? That was one way. Another is clearing context. Another is parallel sub-agents. I hardly ever hit the weekly token usage in Claude Code subscription, and we have like a enterprise level thing. Each seat is equivalent to like $170 subscription, so it's less than the $200 max plan. I hardly ever hit halfway. So using Sonnet, using sub-agents with Haiku, using feature docs, I don't really hit the same limits as most people. I'd say if you're paying for tokens and you don't have that Claude subscription, you should definitely check out DeepSeek, V4, Pro, and Flash. They are so cheap and they are very capable. Flash hits at the capability of Haiku, and Pro hits at the capability of Sonnet. So if Anthropic ever turn my faucet of tokens off, I'm going to switch to those models and be fine. Okay, last question. Oh no, a couple more questions before we get back in. How do you see the goal mode in Claude or Codex, which set up the requirement to do the iteration until achieving setup goal? I haven't really used that method of. I am very selective in how I use looping. I think you get into the territory of vibe coding if you loop with a goal, because you stop being able to control how it's getting to that goal. And the models are really good at taking any path to get to what they perceive as your goal. So even if it is doing the wrong thing, but technically what you wanted, they will get there. And at the end of it, you would have wasted hours of time and tokens to maybe have the wrong thing. So I don't use loops in that way. I don't use goals and then looping to get to them. I follow this approach and it works really well. Do those influence token usage save for skills or plugins work? I don't understand that question. Have you tried just switching the whole Claude Code harness over to OpenAI or Kimi? Just using API to save token, but to leverage Claude Code harness. It's a much longer discussion we should have. Let's catch up in the Discord to talk about that, because it's a very deep discussion. And I think we should get back to the thing. And that was the last question I saw. Okay. Now you've got your code implemented. It's done all of the phases. You've looked through them. You're happy about them. I haven't done that, but in the interest of time, I'm going to say that I have and move on. So you've looked and it has implemented all of your phases and you're ready to do this as a pull request. I have a workflow for this. I have to specify draft PR because usually when I do this, I will make a draft PR and then I will look through each line of the code on there and then I will convert it to a full PR so people don't automatically get notified until I'm happy for the review to happen. It's loading the PR workflow. This PR workflow gets the description from the feature doc. So it makes like a useful pull request description. There's language in there to make it succinct and not to have checklists and bit of this, bit of that to make a good description. It will also watch any CI checks until they are green. And the purpose of this, it does this in a bash loop. The purpose of this is that if there is a CI failure, it sees that, it looks for the cause, it addresses that, makes a new commit, and loops again. So this is the instance where I will use a loop, because sometimes there are processes that are like, you may not be running all of the GitHub actions locally when you verify. You may be just running the automated tests. So if there's like a CI action, like some infrastructural thing or some linting or whatever, and it fails for that, it can repair the code and then check again. Basically, I only get a URL in Claude Code when all of the checks are passed and the PR is mergeable. And at that point, I would go and look. Oh, it also, that PR description that it makes, it applies my writing style guide to it so that it sounds like my writing. I generated a writing style guide skill after feeding it all of the books and blog posts I've ever written that I could find links to online. And then it like made a writing style guide that is indicative of my writing style, and all the pull request descriptions that go up are just now worded in my own writing style. So it doesn't read like AI, which is something I would highly recommend you do, even if you don't use these harnesses for coding, if you make skills for your writing style, because there'll be less AI junk sounding stuff on the internet. Okay. So we have a pull request up. Let's go and have a look at that. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, what have I done? F12, F11, that one. Oh, that's not it either. I'm missing an A. Okay, so it's generated this from the feature doc. I keep the Claude Code attribution in here. You'll see there's like little bits here. Pay no attention to this avatar. You'll understand what that is in a little bit. But all of this is written in my writing style. I would, at this point, go through and review each file. Once I've reviewed it, I'll click this viewed button so that it's collapsed there. The point of clicking that viewed button is that if you need to make changes, like if you tell the agent, okay, I don't like how you've done this, do it differently, change it around, and it pushes a commit, and you come back to here and you hit refresh, or there's like a little refresh button here if it's updated since you looked at it, it will re-expand all files that were changed at this point. So if you already viewed this file and you collapse it like that, and a subsequent commit changes that file again, it will be expanded so that you can know you're only looking at like stuff that has changed since you viewed this already. Cool GitHub tips. I would review all of this in detail, push back if there are things I don't like or things I want changed. I'm also committing this feature doc plan. But now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to review every line of this. I'm simply going to go straight to the merge part of this. So in real life, I would review this. Once I'm happy with all the implementation, all the file changes, I will turn this over to review. I will add reviewers and then wait for their feedback, right? There are some steps that you can do to preempt that feedback. One of those things, after I've cleared here, is that you can run a review skill. I made a special review skill just based on what my teammates were doing to review my pull requests. So one of them would run Claude Code's code review skill. One of them would run an in-house skill that we have called Blast Radius, which looks at all the changes in the pull request and tries to identify parts of the application that might break because of them that need to be tested. And then it'll fan out and like test those things, see if they're working or if they're broken. So my teammates were doing these two things consistently for my pull requests. And I said, like first chatted with them to figure out what they were doing. And then I put a custom skill together called review. And review is another loop. So it'll run Claude Code's code review skill. If it finds any things, it'll spawn a sub agent to fix, and then it'll run it again until it finds nothing to fix in the code review. And then it goes into a separate phase. I've actually documented these in the slides, so I should go through them. So it's a self-healing loop. Phase 1 is that code quality, so code review from Claude Code, the built-in skill. And then phase 2 is blast radius, which is that in-house one. Again, it'll run that. If it finds anything, it'll sub-agent to fix, and then it'll run it again until it finds nothing. And when it's done with these, it'll post a final report to the PR. So all the things that addressed, and the things that might still need human review that were not verifiable as it reviewed. So these are things like, can it deploy to staging? Like, does it look good on staging in these areas? Those kinds of things. Often, which PR should I review? Oh, it didn't even have the link to do this. That's so silly. Okay, I'm not actually going to run it though, because it's quite a time-intensive thing, but it wants that PR review. I think because I cleared there, it lost context of the PR that it had submitted. I would probably in future run review without clearing the context between submitting the PR. But I would run that in real life. I'm not going to run it now. Often when I'm working on these things for work, I will also have to be dealing with like a ticket management system like Jira. And there I need to like post some status of the ticket. Also, if there's a special QA person in the team, I would also want to post a list of things for that QA person to pay attention to that might have broken, that need testing over and above the automated tests. And I got a skill for that. So give me a QA checklist. There is a skill for that. There's the review skill link, QA checklist. It just looks at the feature doc, generates a set of testing instructions, and then it's just user-facing things. So what the QA person can actually do in the application once it's deployed to staging, can they click through to certain places and see things that are good, change things through CMS, whatever. It makes this markdown, this big copyable markdown thing, and then I just paste that straight into Jira. And then there are checkboxes there, and it's really good. It's really good. So I will make the PR, I'll run it through review, and separately I will make this QA checklist, paste the checklist in the Jira ticket, and then put the ticket into like a review column. And the QA can like see what they need to check based on what was changed, which is really cool. Saves me a lot of time. That's also linked there. Okay, once my teammates have given me feedback and they're happy with it, they've run their own checks, they've approved. Depending on how your company works, this might go one of two ways, okay? The company where I work, we have branch protections on, and we can only commit verified, like signed commits. We can only merge pull requests that are fully signed commits. So that's this verified thing here. You'll notice the ones with Claude Code aren't verified. And what I actually then need to do is I have a separate skill that I'm not going to show in the slides, but that skill, it's in the same repo, so you can find it easy enough. We'll take a PR URL, and it will rewrite the commits in there so that they are not Friday the Robot, but that they are me with my own code signing, and we'll make sure that every commit is code signed, and then force push. And at that point, if everyone is approved and the checks all pass, we merge. For projects, side projects, I don't have that branch protection on, and I actually have a workflow that I use that also does a little bit of cleanup. So I'm going to say run the merge workflow. That merges it in GitHub. We can actually switch to that to see that happen. Really dangerous just merging code that I haven't reviewed every line for, but I guess I will go back and refactor. This merges in GitHub. It deletes the local branch that's now stale because it's been merged into main. It deletes the work tree and makes sure that if there were any symlinks linking into the work tree, that they are then pointing to the files that are merged into main. So where that is useful is if you have like a virtual Nginx server that's pointing to your work tree so that you can test stuff in that work tree. If it is looking at a symlink in the work tree, it will actually find that file in the main folder after merge and link back to that so that the dev server will just keep on working even after the code is merged. But that's really an artifact of like Nginx and web dev. It would be a different kind of thing for game dev or app dev. But the actual merge cleanup stuff is also in that skill, and I link to that. So deletes the work tree, pulls main so that it has the merge stuff in the main folder, fixes any symlinks. There is a link to that workflow. Okay, some tips and tricks. You've just actually seen the full workflow of RPI. So we did the research, we used the research to make a plan, and we implemented off of the plan. We did this with sub-agents, we did this in Claude Code, there was skills involved. We didn't actually use any MCP tools yet, but it's good to know they exist, and I will talk a little bit about them in the time that we have left. AI doesn't remember anything between sessions, as I said earlier. So writing to files or a database or an Obsidian vault is essential to recovering if something happens in the agent session. It's really cheap just to say, you're not really getting the point here, model, to run clear, to read back in the feature doc, and you are in a better place than before you cleared. So write to files. Commit them. Make sure you can share them. As I mentioned, they are pretty useful if you're going back and debugging how something was built and why it was built, or if you are handing over your work to someone else, and then they can look back at the project history and get a sense of how things were built and why. I have an alias here called Claude. I need to tell you what this thing is. Earlier, there was a question about my frustrations with AI, and right at the beginning, I spoke about only the handful of instances where I got frustrated with AI. The majority of my frustrations with AI are down to me telling it one thing and then a day later having to tell it the same thing because it forgot. There are methods to get around this, like writing to a claude.md file or writing to a memory file. But I'm here to tell you the shockingly mundane truth that those don't actually work. It doesn't read memory files unless claude.md is missing, and its system prompt for how it handles claude.md says that it can ignore stuff it doesn't think is relevant. So whatever you put in claude.md, there is a good chance it will just forget and ignore. When you get to auto compaction, it seldom brings through claude.md stuff. When you get to committing and all the processes around that, it doesn't remember what you said in claude.md. That's where a lot of my frustration has been in the past. And I stumbled upon an incredibly simple tool to get it to actually remember stuff I've told it in the past. And this pclaude alias is how you can do that in Claude Code or any other harness where you have the ability to add stuff to the system prompt. Just to take a step back, the system prompt is a set of instructions that is given to the model in every message that is sent to it. So before your actual query gets to it, like what font is running on the website, it gets a whole bunch of text, and that text tells it how to be, what tools it has, all that kind of thing. You don't typically see that system prompt when you're using Claude Code, but you can actually edit it. You can add stuff onto it. And turns out you can add really useful stuff onto it that will get it to basically be like 100 times better. pclaude is what I'm calling that thing, okay? In Claude Code CLI is that CLI binary that you can run, and it gets you into this UI. But you can give it a couple parameters with additional instructions. So there's an append system prompt thing that you can give it a string to, and append sub-agent system prompt, which you can repeat those instructions for. And if you use instructions kind of like this, then it turns out you can get it to like recall stuff better. I built a bunch of tools in the agent built on top of Claude Code that I'm using, and those tools give me the ability to add preferences and to search for preferences by keyword. So I can say things like, whenever you do anything, whenever you SSH into a prod and you do anything in a production server, only do read-only operations unless I have explicitly told you not to only do read-only operations. And then I have an addition to my system prompt that says, before you do anything, identify meaningful keywords. In between these two sentences, I actually have a use this tool to search for preferences related to those keywords, and then read the results and follow everything that you see in those preferences. And you don't have to use the MCP tools that I used. You can use Obsidian. So for instance, I have a vault set up here called preferences, and I have some files in there. I just have one file in there, and it says, when you need to look up my location, for example, for weather forecast in my location, this is the location you should use. Oh, I've got a typo there. As my current location, unless stated otherwise. And then I can exit out of this. I'll actually make a new thing here called eClaude for the alias I've set up. And then I'll say, what's the weather like? You can use web search. Check what the first thing it is that it does. Search context for a query weather, because it's identified that keyword in the vault preferences. It finds that location preference, and then it searches the weather for my location. So I had to tell it that preference in Obsidian once, and something unrelated, it has found that preference, and it is executing based on that preference that it has found. This is just an example because I don't actually store these preferences in Obsidian. When I show you my agent, I will get it to show you the preferences as well. But really cool, hey? You can give it a preference, and days later on something you think is unrelated, it will find that preference and act on it, so that you don't have to keep on putting it into Claude.md for every project you work on and hoping it won't ignore or forget that. It searches this as it's about to do the action for each step, which is really good. Really, 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 really good. And however you can implement this, I recommend you implement it. I have given you an example of this in here. It's not actually the full code example because it's not showing the Obsidian preference thing. But for the sake of the video that's being recorded, I will actually show that alias. So which eClaude? This is the alias, the full text of it. So always identify keywords, then run Obsidian search context vault preferences in bash. Do that every time, pass these instructions to the sub agent, and then there's a separate sub agent thing. So if you want to see it, you can actually just put a screenshot of this text into Claude Code and get it to actually write this to your bash file or your ZSH file or whatever terminal emulator you use. And then you too could have really good long-term memory recall in Claude Code. Oh, come on, drag that. Really cool, hey? That's a really cool tip. Okay, I will show you. Oh, yeah, just to say, I have an implementation of this in Friday, which is my agent harness, and it uses SQLite and some MCP tools to add new preferences, so I don't have to physically go and make a file in Obsidian. But also my setup is really non-standard, and you might not be able to get there pretty quickly. I want to show you Friday, though. Everything that I've shown you that I've done in Claude Code is actually used under the hood in Friday. So I made this agent meta harness called Friday. I interact with it through Telegram. I'm able to make new threads in it. And you can think of each thread as a new terminal tab running its own Claude Code. So they all have their own different contexts. I made one yesterday when I set up this API application, and in here I can, it's switched into the API project. Let's have a look what its current working directory is. There we go. Okay, so it's the API projects code folder. It mirrors this. And I can talk about the code base with it in this Telegram thread. It seems like Claude Code plus complication. But there are some really cool things about this concept. For example, it's a lot easier for me to manage Claude instances through threads than it is for me to manage them through terminal tabs. This stuff that's happening here on the right and this code that we're seeing on the left is actually not running on the machine that I'm talking to you from. It is running from a Mac Mini, and it is running 24/7. So I can make scheduled tasks and it will just run them even when I'm asleep, and it can work in the background. And I work from my phone most of the time, unless I am reviewing plans or code, where I use Z, which is this editor on the left-hand side here. The reason I use Z is predominantly because it has a very good SSH project system. So I can open a remote folder on this Mac Mini server and just like edit anything within that. Let me go back to that project. I spend a lot of my days walking, and while I am walking, I do the research and the planning steps. So I will have something that I want to build, and while I'm out on a walk, I will have a whole long voice conversation with the agent about this. Can you look at recently merged work in the code base, please? Tell me what's done. So I will make a voice note in Telegram. I have some transcription stuff built in the background that will transcribe that, send a message to Claude Code. And then I also have, you see there it's searching for my preferences. I also have a separate system that does text-to-speech, but I have that disabled at the moment because the Telegram desktop app is terrible at playing that automatically, and it just wastes my time otherwise. Cool. So I have a discussion with it there. I think, so there's a question about what the advantage of this is versus Visual Studio or remote code. I think there are a bunch of them. Like at the moment for Friday, I am building on top of the Claude Agent SDK. So I can turn off a lot of stuff that is not turn-offable inside Claude Code. I can also add my own tooling that is not possible to add in the same way inside Claude Code. For example, I am running about 100 MCP tools in Friday, and they are available in every project in every folder that I work in that I have Friday pointed at, because they are not using an external MCP server, they're using internal MCP tooling. The difference there is that if I had these tools to do things like manage media and write notes and look at my mail folders and schedule tasks, I would have to configure them as an MCP server in every project. Claude Code has this really weird bug where even if you have MCP servers configured in your global configuration, if your project defines its own MCP servers, it's not additive. It replaces the global ones. So I would have to, best case, manage MCP configuration in a single global file, but worst case, manage it in every project that has its own MCP servers as well, which is a pain in the butt. This way, they're all internal tools and they're available everywhere. There are things that I can do in Friday that you just can't do in Claude Code. For example, I have a pseudo tool, let's call it that, where I can ask the agent to do things that aren't possible in Claude Code, like install app dependencies or Python libraries. You would have to run that manually in Claude Code, by the way. Oh, there's a cool tip, by the way, I remembered to tell you. Back here, if you are in Claude Code and you just want to, like, it gives you a command that you need to run yourself, or you just want to run a console command, you don't actually have to exit out Claude Code or open a new tab. You can type exclamation, and then you can do your bash command in there, and it will read the contents of that back into your Claude session. So if it's told you to run something and you run it and you get an error, it can see that error and then act on that error. Like now, it's apparently doesn't, the way it thinks it needs to act on that is just telling me what the current directory is, I guess. Yeah, so exclamation mark lets you do bash commands from that. I think there are loads of things, loads of benefits to using Friday, but I wanted to show you that this is the interface that I use Research Plan Implement through. It has access to all of those skills, and I use them through Friday every day for like 80% of my work. The other 20% just being like random game dev that I do, or managing stuff that's not code related, like my media library or scheduled tasks or mail or whatever. And that it has those preferences built in, but they're using an MCP, an internal MCP tool, and a SQLite database. I think that's the most of what I want to show about Friday. Are there questions? I think we've reached kind of the end of what I have to show you. Remote control is a thing, and you should definitely check it out. I think Friday is a different category of stuff, but thank you for that, Joshua. Major advantage of Claude Code Harness versus Codex. I think Anthropic's models are slightly better, and I can use them with subscription billing in Claude Code. When running the built-in review, usually feedback is given a ranking from minor to critical. I can actually look at what the review skills things are doing, because I don't remember what I set that up to do. So confidence above 80, no significant issues. It's probably just using its own like determination about that. How do you balance infinite capability of AI and limits of human cognitive capacity? I think it depends how involved you want to be in the process. If you want to read all the code, you're not going to 10x your output, unless your output is very writing code dependent. But I think if you want to have good control over what's being done and make sure slop's not getting in, you won't be as fast as influencers on Twitter are telling you can be, but your output will be much better. That's the balance I'm trying to strike at the moment. I have surprisingly 100% better output this year from using this, but that is with reviewing every line of code. Friday is not open sourced at the moment. I think I'm more keen to do it these days because I have a plan if Anthropic turn off the subscription billing. But in the beginning, I didn't want to open source it because I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that I was doing that thing that was still very much a gray area. To give you a bit of context, on the 15th of June, I think it was, they wanted to disallow you from using the Agent SDK with your subscription billing, and you would go onto API billing with it, and that would basically make it economically unviable for me to run Friday in the same way. I did a whole bunch of work at the time in preparation for that so that I could switch over to DeepSeek models, still using Friday on the Claude Agent SDK because of all the tooling that I've built for that. But it wasn't necessary. I can move to that if they ever decide to try the same thing again. So long story short, I think it is more open sourceable now, but I haven't done that yet. I think there are still some config things that are very Chris coded that could be slightly different. But let's talk on Discord, and I can invite you to the repo and you can check it out yourself and clone it and whatever if you want to. It's really good. It's really good. Before you leave, please give feedback. Chris has posted a link in the chat for that. Again, if you want to get to these slides, you can go to assertchris.dev and just scroll down to the bottom. See more decks, I think it is. Yeah, see more. Okay, link in chat again, or instructions in chat, I guess. You can click on over here and you can walk through all the slides, and all of the related skills are in there. And this is actually just my open source Claude skills repo. So there's all the skills that we got there. There's one for resolving conflicts, which is really good. One for reauthoring a PR to a different user profile, which I think is very Chris coded. You'd have to like fork that and change some details about that. The review skill, loads and loads and loads of things. Might be useful to you. Any more questions? You can also unmute and ask the questions because like open floor now. Do you build regular routine to look for dead code and check security checks? Yes and no. Like I don't have a skill for this, but I do weekly sessions where I will go into a code base I care about and just do like a human eyes review of stuff to see if there are like architectural things that I would change or like old unused features that I would change. I think that there is a lot to be said for GitHub Actions that check dependency vulnerabilities. And I could potentially augment the review skill to also do like a security and dead code review. I just haven't done that yet because no one in the team is doing that other than like regularly scheduled agent-based reviews of the code base. We've got like a whole bunch of like security checklists and things that we run through that like make this happen periodically, but not as part of the day-to-day work. Do you attempt to fully understand the code base? I do attempt to fully understand the code base. There are obviously things that are just like, there's obviously a point at which there's just too much in a set of code bases to remember everything. But what I'm working on, I try to understand as I'm working on it, which means reviewing all the code. To give you an example, like there are code bases at work that are huge and we couldn't understand all of the stuff in it at the same time, but we can have the agents summarize basic structure. And when we're working on specific portions, we get to understanding everything about those particular portions before we change anything and also as we do the work. How are design decisions captured? So in the plan doc, there are decisions captured based on here. Claude models are really good at asking clarifying questions up front and then also as the planning goes. But you can say in your loop to improve the planning and the research, you can say like, look for assumptions and ask me questions about them. And your doc can get like quite big by the end of that loop. And then like I will usually have like a dozen questions to answer. And so I'll spend a little bit of time after research and after planning saying, what are the open questions, giving answers for them, and then it encodes that back into the plan. But it's just part of the template. That template is in feature doc? No, it's not that. It's workflow new feature. Right, there's a template here that has like the things to fill in and also like questions, decisions needed, decisions made. So it's all part of that. Have you tried to implement any workflows using open weight models? Yes, I have a whole parallel project for this, which I am like beavering away at. So to give you some context, Friday is the name of one of the AIs of Tony Stark in the Iron Man comics. Helen is another name of an AI of Tony Stark. And so like when Anthropic were going to do the switch over to like non-subscription billing for Agent SDK, I started making a successor AI thing to it called Helen. Anthropic reversed and I could continue using Friday. So I changed Helen's focus slightly to be a harness for small models to do big work. Essentially, could I get a model that I run locally to be as capable as Sonnet in writing a plan? And that's where like all my work has been for like the last 3 months, basically. when I'm not doing like other side projects or main office work. So the idea is that this harness is like built for really small models to be able to do plans. And at the moment, it's like 30% out of 100 in terms of the plan quality. And there are like feedback loops going on at the moment to figure out how to make that better. But yes, this is specifically designed for open weight models that I could run on hardware that I have to try and do planning and research to the same level of quality as I can do in Friday or in Claude Code. And once I've nailed this and it's doing good plans, I will move on to the actual implementation, which will use small models, which might actually be easier than the planning side of things, which will use small models to do big work. How do you evaluate open weight model quality versus frontier models and its ability to problem solve cheaper per token? Doesn't mean overall project cost is cheaper. Yes. So this is where I have those evaluations. I have it in here. I have other. I have another repo that I'm using. Basically, what I'm using in that other repo is I am making a plan in Friday with Claude models for a thing, and then I'm running that exact same research through the Helen harness stuff to see the quality of the plans that the open weight models generate, and compare them side by side to the one that, like the gold standard one that I generated with Sonnet. Thus far, like there are problems with that, but I'm building evaluations constantly to like make sure that I'm testing them all the same way, and that I can continue to test them even after I've made refinements to their processes and prompts. It's a much larger discussion, though. Like we should definitely chat more about this in the Discord, because I could talk for ages about it. Helen's the thing, though, and this is already open source. How many tokens do I consume monthly? I never get halfway through the 175 subscription seat that I have. So that's less tokens than the 200 max plan. If you use RPI and Sonnet, you can get really good work output, and you can glide in comfortably under the 200 max plan. But if you don't have a plan yet and you are open to using other models, I can highly recommend using Cursor and their model composer, because it's really good and really cheap. So I can recommend that. If money is not a concern and you can get work to pay for it, the best models I've found that work really well with this workflow are the Anthropic ones, and Sonnet is fine. If you're paying for if you want to pay just for API usage, I'd recommend DeepSeek V4 Pro, because it hits the same as Sonnet, but it's billed as much less than Haiku. So it's like really cost effective. I'm also running the planning harness stuff, this Helen stuff, against the DeepSeek models as well, to kind of assess how close they are to the Sonnet stuff. But the harness has to be different to work for small models. And so like, it's not like a slam dunk running the planning against DeepSeek V4 Pro. Like the harness actually does a lot of heavy lifting and needs improvement. What a waffle. That wasn't really a good answer, Spencer. Like half of the 200 max plan a month is what I use. You're welcome, everyone. I think that's me. I'm going to stop sharing. Chris, is there anything you want to still say?
No, thank you, Chris, very much. So this was a very high quality content session. So yeah, thank you for taking the time and preparing this. So yeah, extremely appreciate from me, and thank you everyone who joined and decided to kind of share 2 hours of your lives with us. So yeah, really appreciate for your support.